Good evening, friends. Welcome to another one of my evening walks. When I share my thoughts with you, I'm basically thinking aloud, and we are in a very private sort of a space. I don't feel a sense of public speaking. I get this feeling of being with you. Of course, we don't see each other. Some of you do call me. I end up receiving calls from some people. Like today, I ended up receiving a call from a person, a Pakistani, who was settled in UAE for the last 20 years. And he was very complimentary. He blessed me, blessed us for the kind of work we were doing. I get a lot of these calls from people, which gives me a sense of being on the right track. So I'm just sharing some thoughts with you, and I want to acknowledge some voices of wisdom. I would like to begin by acknowledging that there are a lot of people in the activist community who have shaped my thoughts with their insights, and often one or two sentences that they have spoken have really rendered major changes in my outlook and sort of brought the whole thing together for me. So one person like that is a relatively unknown person. Her name is Vinita Singh. We are not friends anymore. It's been a very long time since we have talked. She lives in Delhi, Gurgaon, I think. We used to talk a lot. We used to discuss a lot about the Constitution. She was a kind of evangelist for the Constitution. And the couple of years that I spent in her company were like a crash course in Constitution and constitutionality. And while I also turned into a bit of an evangelist in those years, I could not continue with that group. There was a group we formed. Basically, I can say she formed, so Vinita formed, called We the People. And I think there were philosophical inconsistencies, at least for me, so that I could not continue with that group. I could not put up with the philosophical inconsistencies that I found. Maybe they weren't inconsistencies. But let me acknowledge the thought that she left me with, because it's very important. She said that we are basically co-creating India all the time. See, India was never created on a specific day, in a specific way. I'm going to extrapolate a lot from what she said and what our discussion was all about. But the essence of co-creating is that there has been no creator. Nehru did not create India. Nehru did not create the India we know. Bhagwan Ram did not create the India that we know. There is no perfect state for this India. It cannot be said truthfully that India was ever a Sone ki chidiya, a golden bird, or a Ram Rajya. And during the stage of Lord Rama, there was a state of perfect equilibrium and perfect happiness, which has later on been spoilt by invaders, by British invaders, by Mughal invaders, etc., etc. That is not a genuine way of looking at it. There was no perfect India, and we have not deteriorated from a perfect India. We cannot go backwards into the future. One of the visions that people have is that we can kind of restore the purity of India, maybe by promoting the Hindutva agenda, a Hindu culture, a purist Hindu culture, by promoting the use of Indian languages rather than English, by rejecting foreign influences and adopting a kind of a purism, so that we arrive at a pure Indianness. I don't think that is a genuine way of thinking of India. It's a political way of thinking of India. It may suit some people's politics. This kind of exclusionary thoughts may suit some political parties. I don't want any part of that. So I am just stating right here that I don't buy into the Sone ki chidiya mythology. I don't buy into the Ram Rajya mythology. I don't believe that having a temple in Ayodhya is going to make any difference, any positive difference at least, to India. That's not what India is all about. So, what are we doing? We are co-creating India all the time. India is a work in progress all the time, all of the time. Each moment is as important as the previous moment, and as important as the next moment. There are, of course, turning points in history. For example, it can happen very easily that tomorrow India goes to war against Pakistan, or Pakistan goes to war against India. We are dragged into a war that we don't want, a war that's very destructive. There can be turning points. Those turning points can be avoided. Again, there are large numbers of people involved in those turning points. It's not just one man, but occasionally it can fall into the hands of one man, and a critical decision, rightly or wrongly, may be made by one man. Could be the Prime Minister, could be someone else, could be a general, could be an army chief, could be a diplomat who triggers a war with careless words. So there are all kind of things, but for the most part, all of us, including you and me, are equally co-creating India. We are creators of India. We are not just helpless subjects. We are not just inhabitants. We are not just passengers. We are all passengers, but we are all drivers. So, the principle of co-creation. Once again, thank you, Vinita Singh. To me, back in 2009, 2010, I think 2010 or 11, I forget which year, the word co-creation, the expression co-creation was a very important turning point in my life. It defined something critical. Before that, in 2008 or 9, another voice of wisdom came into my life, and I want to acknowledge that. Shailesh Gandhi. Shailesh Gandhi he's an RTI guru. He's a former Central Information Commissioner, but I think his main contribution is not so much of being a Central Information Commissioner, a civil society member, one of the few civil society members who turned into an information commissioner. That is, of course, a signal contribution. But he mentored a very large number of activists. He taught us, he kind of groomed us in RTI. You know, he used to have these meetings at his house. I can call them darbars in a joking way. He used to preside over these meetings where he encouraged discussion, where he encouraged us to think about, debate about the intent, the legislative intent of each word, of each clause, and some of these more important sections of RTI Act, the definition of information, the definition of public authority, the definition of inspection, that sort of thing. Section 8, which essentially consists of all the information that is exempted from disclosure, various clauses of Section 8 and their interpretations. So, various things. I am not going to go into these sections, but the important thing is, it is critically important, it is of critical importance for citizens to analyze, to understand legislations. And here is the reason. The reason is that if we don't understand legislations, if we don't understand the legislative intent, then judicial interpretation of laws can often go widely off the mark and drag the law away, or can damage the law through overinterpretation of its clauses. And indeed, we do see a lot of damage done to the Right to Information Act by High Courts and Supreme Courts. Many sections, many critical sections of the Act are overinterpreted. I think it is Section 81J, confidential information, etc., are overinterpreted by the High Court to such an extent that it almost robs the Act, the RTI, Right to Information Act, of a substantial part of its meaning. So, one of the things that I learned from Shailesh Gandhi is the importance of the common man understanding legislative intent and the right of the common man, the duty and the right of the common man to insist upon that legislative intent being maintained by the judiciary. Let me repeat that in a more concise way. It is of critical importance that we, the members of civil society, should prevail upon the judges with moral authority to preserve the legislative intent of various laws and not castrate them, not mutilate them by wrong judgments and wrong precedents which rob the act of the intention of the overall scope of the law. I hope that makes sense. Shailesh Gandhi had a few things to say, and one of the things when he met me, actually, when we initially met, when Shailesh Gandhi and I met for the first time, I was a kind of a street agitator. I was a rabble rouser. I will go into more details later, but I was agitating for the rights of pedestrians. The rights of pedestrians to have clear spaces. This is back in 2008. And I had held a number of demonstrations on the streets of Mumbai, defying the police mandate that agitations and demonstrations may only be held in Azad Maidan and with police permission. In 2008 and 2009, I, along with hundreds of citizens, must have defied that mandate no less than 30-35 times. But at the end of it, when Shailesh Gandhi called me to meet him, I was forced to reckon with one uncomfortable truth. He said, "Have you achieved the change you wanted?" I was being hailed as a hero by many. But the honest answer to his question was no. He said, "Have you come any closer to achieving the change that you wanted?" Again, the answer was unfortunately no. Maybe I sold myself a little short, because yes, I had achieved some things. And there are those who will say that I should have continued down that track. I should have stayed on that track. Some of my closest friends and fans, if I may use that word, fans, felt that I had let go of a good thing. But anyway, my perception was that no, I had not. And then he brought to me one very uncomfortable truth. He said, "See, when we agitate, we get people on the streets. It creates a spectacle. It creates a spectacle that gives people a high, gives us a high, gives the participants a high, makes us feel good about ourselves, makes us feel empowered. But if the system chooses to ignore it deliberately, then the system can ignore it. And even if you get media coverage, it's just yesterday's newspaper. 1 day later, 2 days later, 1 month later, it's all forgotten. It's just yesterday's newspapers. So, how does the change happen? So, one of the crucial insights, one of the critical insights that he brought to me was change happens when the change happens in government offices, when change happens in the paperwork. Because it is essentially paperwork that makes government work permanent, which gives any kind of permanence to government work and administration work. And once records have been created in the government, in the administration, they never really seem to die. They're just there. They are permanent. Records are not easily destroyed. So you need to make changes inside government offices. You need to make changes in the administration, which means paperwork. So the job isn't done till the paperwork is done. And that is where right to information, RTI, comes in. RTI as a pressure tactic, I guess. Right to information as a pressure tactic, as a way of forcing the system to respond to you, can happen and can change some realities. And I would like to say that this is true. It is one of the things that I have learned. And then after that, I learned the futility of RTI. But before I go on, first let me recap. Shailesh Gandhi taught me that it isn't enough to be a rabble rouser. It isn't enough to stir up people in the streets. It isn't enough to create a grand spectacle. It isn't enough to posture, to adopt a heroic posture. Unless there is some kind of a permanence that you can bring to that change, you basically achieved nothing. You just enjoyed yourself, you had a blast and not done anything in life. And I'm forced to agree with that. Then there was one more thing I would like to share, and I'm later going to come to the point where I feel that in many ways this effort to pressure the system with RTI has failed. But I'll come to that later. First, I'll still stay with one of the things that Shailesh Gandhi brought into my life. One of the things he memorably said was, the battle is to be fought and won in the minds and hearts of the people. And I believe that 100% to be true. Basically, everything that we do, everything that an activist does, can be meaningful only if it results in a change in the minds and in the hearts of people. That's the only meaningful change. And of course, when we change the system, yes, it is good, but a change in the system, would have some measure of permanence only if there is an accompanying shift in the consciousness of people, a change in the hearts and minds of people. So I take that very seriously. I have taken that to heart. Everything that we do is really a battle for bringing some change in the minds and hearts of people. So this is one thing. Now, I learned a sobering lesson. I started using RTI Act. I started filing a lot of RTIs. I got a lot of kicks. Like many other RTI activists, I used to get my kicks from getting information, laying my hands on information, government papers, documents. Gives you a sense of importance when they copy an entire file and give it to you. Gives you a sense of importance when you are able to draw conclusions, join the dots, expose the government on something. As a journalist, it was always very delightful. But I realized that unless we are doing something that is of importance to people, we are really not doing anything at all worthwhile. So for instance, in the early days, I have taken up an anti-hawker agenda. At least for 2 or 3 years, I think I had a very strong anti-hawker agenda. Now that resonates very strongly with the middle classes, who, while they buy from hawkers, they buy vegetables, they buy fruits, they buy all sorts of things from hawkers. They buy clothes in places like Bandra. But they resent the way that a hawker has occupied the public spaces. And I took up some very strong hawker, anti-hawker type stances. But I had to, upon reflection, I don't remember exactly who triggered that in me, but I think it was one person who was a fan of mine, who was a kind of a fan of mine. She used to come for my demonstrations, and one day she asked me what was my thing about hawkers, what was my stance on hawkers, and I think I said they shouldn't be there, they shouldn't be there at all. She disagreed very strongly with me and went away, never to be seen again. I don't remember her name. But that made me think. At first I thought she was being sentimental and soft-hearted or something. But then, if you apply your mind to this whole thing, what you realize is, see, the city is more the slum dwellers than it is ours. We, the people who live in flats, we are probably 30-40%. It's the slum dwellers, the people who live in the housing of the underprivileged, or even those who live in small houses, one-room kitchen houses, people who earn small amounts of money. They run this city. They serve this city. They are the sum and substance of Mumbai. And if we think that our solutions should exclude them, I think we make the mistake of being very shallow and superficial. So I may think that I want a neat city in a very aesthetic way. I want my city to look like Singapore. But if that solution does not give livelihood, or it ends up depriving a very large section of the people of Mumbai of livelihood, then there is something deeply wrong in that solution. That is not a solution. So initially back in 2008, 2009, I sort of turned into the darling of the middle class. Some of them at least. By taking up a very strong middle class agenda, anti-hawker agenda. But one of the reasons I gave up this agitation for pedestrians is I realized that the question of pedestrians was a lot more complicated because of the presence of hawkers in the same space that pedestrians occupy. And I had no satisfactory answer to the question of what do you do with the hawkers. I struggled for answers. I searched for answers. I thought I had some kind of answers, but I was forced to admit that I didn't have the answers. And that was why I gave it up. Good night.